Welcome back. We're going to do a quick figure study of this drawing by Marcantonio Raimondi. He was a contemporary of Raphael's, and he actually did a lot of the engravings of Raphael's designs that were published during Raphael's lifetime. So this would have been the early 1500s. So what we're trying to get used, I picked this because it's a profile, so the head is relatively easy. We're going to work sight size if you want. Notice I'm trying to work sight size, and I'm doing my simplified schematic of the skull to set things up. And we want to make sure that we're dealing with pretty much an 8-head figure, so make sure you've got enough room for 8 more heads going down to the ground. So this should be about 1/8 of the overall height of your drawing. And that's something that we're trying to internalize and just get used to calculating that. Oh shoot, is it? Okay, yeah, we're still recording. Okay, so sorry about the delay. Okay. One thing I want to emphasize today, and some of you have heard this before, but the weight is not always evenly distributed between the model's 2 feet. We balance with our inner ears, as you may have heard, and if we pull a plumb line from a point around where the point centered between the 2 inner ears, so we go straight down, that's called a plumb line. That's going to tell us where the figure's weight is, and we can see that the weight is pretty much all on the foot that is on our left. It is not evenly distributed, and the most common error beginners make is they always want the feet to be sort of on equidistant from this line, and they don't really appreciate that often the weight is all on one foot and not the other. So that kind of plumb line is going to be helpful to get started. I'm next going to think about some of the anatomical landmarks we're learning. Here's the opening at the top of the rib cage. I'm going to conceptualize the rib cage of this pose as being quite vertical. Usually the rib cage tips back a little, but this figure is sort of turning, you can feel that the spine is slightly bent, the rib cage is just about dead vertical. Don't make the mistake of trying to face the rib cage all the way towards us. Look for the sternum. See how the sternum is probably about, let's see. So there's the left side of the rib cage, there's the sternum, there's the right side. So the sternum is about 1/3 of the way. So the rib cage is twisted away from us a little. And before we get too much further, it's probably a good idea to think about where the center is. We look for the center to be usually around the pubic arch, and we could measure that right now. I'm going to measure it. You can measure it on your screen. See that? Pubic arch is exactly center of this figure. So why don't we go ahead and mark where we think center is. You can do a little measuring if you want. And these are habits that will enable you, if the first time you ever go to figure drawing, you're going to get the basic proportions right if you just learn where to look for center and learn to measure it. There are some people for whom the center of the pubic arch is not centered, just like there's people for whom the eyes are not centered on the head, but those are a small minority. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look for is the tilt of the pelvis. And we're looking for bony landmarks again, and we're gonna look for, like, see the iliac crest here is way up here, and here it's way down here. So we're gonna try to draw that angle, and that's the tilt of the pelvis. And that creates a nice compression here between the external oblique and the rib cage. So we can sketch that in. And you can see on this side, there's an elongation. So here's the back of the rib cage, and the external oblique on this side is flattened out because it's stretched. And that's an important concept you don't want to ever minimize the amount of compression or stretching. Those factors are really going to help you convey the energy of the pose. Okay, so now we're going to swoop down with why don't we just take one more measurement. Remember, we usually look for the knees to be about halfway between the heel and the pubic arch, and I'm going to call that halfway. So we can mark that and check it. I want you to understand that, like a lot of people, I drew the figure literally for years before learning these proportions, and it's a very dangerous thing to do because what happens is you just develop bad habits that then become hard to break. So it's much wiser to learn the proportions first and then start drawing the figure. Okay, so the knee is a little bit lower on this side because of the leg being bent a little. So let's just and see, we're building everything around this vertical line. And if you like using that vertical, it's a good idea to bring a plumb line with you when you're drawing, which, as I think I've mentioned, is just, it can be a fishing weight or any kind of weight on the end of a string. You close one eye and hold it up in front of the model, and there you go. The other reason I picked this one to draw is because it's a great example of sort of a simplified morphology. The morphology is a little different than anatomy. It's a study of the superficial structures that artists learn to simplify and to draw a figure that's believable and energetic, but doesn't show every little dimple and every the bump of every muscle. We're not going to stress about the the feet too much. I am going to think about, I'm going to pull a plumb line up from these toes and see how far it ends up being from the rib cage. So I'm just going to mark here. So here's the rib cage. There's the outside of the deltoid muscle. And if I come straight down, it gives me an idea where this foot needs to land. And this angle is a little more extreme than you might expect it to be. So we're going to come up here. Something like that. In order to show that the foot's coming towards us, we're just going to do these kind of indicate the foreshortened toes. And now I'm going to transition from the back of the neck over the trapezius muscle to the collarbone, and then continuing on to that deltoid. On this side, the deltoid is much smaller because it is foreshortened, is turned away from us. And here's a case where I'm going to be looking for the negative space created between the arm and the external oblique, and that's going to help me gauge where my elbow turns right about at the iliac crest. And something like this. The other reason I picked this guy is because no hands to draw. And on this side, of course, all this fabric is kind of bunched up around the arm, which is completely covering this hand too. And I believe the reason that the head looks a little small in my drawing, before we do the features, we're going to block in the hair. This guy's hair has quite a bit of volume, so I think it's making the head visibly larger. And I'm going to mark, I did the sternum already, I'm just going to sort of mark the center line between the abs and the navel, which is sort of the middle of the external oblique here, maybe the nipples, and the bottom of the abs. And this is a time, notice I don't have a single detail in this drawing, but I have enough where I can stand back. I normally would have done this a lot faster. I'm just kind of talking you through it, but this is the time to stand back and you can ask yourself, does the figure seem to have the correct proportions? And does the figure seem to be carrying its own weight? Those are the two toughest things to get right and most important things to get right. So that's what you want to ask yourself right now. And I will come around and have a look while I pause the video. Okay, so this is the time in the drawing when I like to do the portrait. Not everybody does, but I just feel a lot better about my drawing if I can see the face on there, and it helps me see all the other proportions. This portrait's going to be simple because it is this silly little profile drawing, classical, very classical profile. So we're going to draw the forehead, this kind of Roman nose. Think about the nose bottoming out. If you imagine your construction of the head bottoming out around where the bottom of the cranium is, there's this sort of exaggerated little philtrum. There's the mouth a third of the way down. There's the chin. It's a great discipline to copy these very simplified little heads because you just learn how to strip things down to their bare essentials and not get hung up on too much detail. So there's the eyebrow. The eye is going to be right below that indentation. The eye is unrealistically large, but we're just going to kind of draw what we see. And I can't tell if, we're not really seeing the ear. We're just seeing this curly hair, and we're not going to draw the curls. We can just indicate a little bit on here, and then I'm going to just focus on where the light ends, which is right about here. And the light is ending along the back of the neck like that. Erase construction lines. There's a little plane change indicated there at the base of the neck. Trapezius to deltoid. I'm going to just reposition my eye just a hair. It was reading a little bit high on the head. Yeah, I like that better. Okay. Trapezius to deltoid on this side. And notice, even in this very economical little drawing, there's a sharp distinction between the halftone here on the edge of this pec, and over here we have an actual shadow defining this pec is falling into absolute shadow. And there's a nice plane change here between the pec and the deltoid. Zoom back out again. I may have mentioned that probably the hardest part of the body to draw right is the armpit. There's all kinds of muscles that intersect under there. And it's also very expressive of movement, so I don't remember what all those muscles are called, but if you want to get serious about this, it's a good area to study. So shadow map like this, and I'm just going to do a first shading on that arm. You could study armpits all day. We're going to shadow map the torso. It's sort of the light's ending about here. All these movements back and forth of the light are going to be helpful in showing what the form is doing. But this is a quick study, so I'm bringing about as much detail into this as I would bring into like a 20-minute figure drawing, not a 2-hour-long figure drawing. If you want to get great at cross-hatching, copying the works of someone like this guy, Marcantonio, Raimondi, is really useful because he made his living making engraved prints. So most of what we know about cross-hatching technique comes from engravers, and you can see his cross-hatching is very, very tight. Okay, moving down, we've got a little bit of a halftone at the bottom of the abs. And just a little bit of a halftone in here, the separation of the abs. A little darkening here right above the iliac crest. And on this side, the iliac crest is defined by this little overlap. Does everyone read this pretty easily? See, external oblique, and then here's the iliac crest, right there. Okay. We've got a couple plane changes here. The gluteal muscles bulging behind, and then some of the quadriceps. On the lower leg, you want to think of all your main volumes projecting out in front of the thigh. and then out behind the calf. Let me zoom back out here, sorry. Okay, so these are the muscles of the inner thigh right here, this bulge. They're called the adductors. I had a student who got really good at figure drawing while she was studying here with me, and she went off to a very fancy college in Maine. I won't name it, there's only a couple of them. There's only 2 fancy colleges in Maine, yeah, but she went to one of them. No, this was a number of years ago, and the teacher, like the unit in her drawing class included figure drawing for a couple weeks. So the teacher hired a model. I think it was a visiting professor of art, and like many so-called artist, she didn't really know how to draw the model. And she literally just said, okay guys, I hope you know how to do this, and just went to her office and like didn't even interact with the students while they had the model because she didn't know how to do it. But it was in the curriculum, so they had to. And the drawings, according to my eyewitness, were so terrible that she actually felt embarrassed for the model because, you know, the one thing that keeps figure drawing from feeling like voyeurism is the skill of the artist. You know, when you walk around the room and people sort of seem to know what they're doing and they're actually learning something from the model posing for them, it's a beautiful, like a totally inspirational experience. If you walk around and you look at the drawings and they look like little kids did them, you just really feel bad for the model to be. And the model does a lot of work aside from like literally burying themselves. That they are struggling. It's hard to hold these poses for 20 minutes at a time. They're working really hard, and so it's a shame if people don't know how to do it. Okay, so notice there's 3 bulges here, kind of interesting. This little bulge here is I think it's called the condyle of the tibia. It's like a swelling on the top of the bone. And then this swelling here is a little fat that pops out under the patella, the kneecap, and then this top swelling is the actual kneecap. And you can see this beautifully represented plane change between this is basically skin right under the bones right under the skin, and then this is the calf, the soleus and brachialis muscles are popping out behind here. And that thing that we've been talking about, like when you see this bulging here and you go to the other side, look what we're going to find. We're going to find this beautiful little indentation. And we're never going to find indentations across from each other. See, this indents here just as this is beginning to swell out here. And you always want to slightly, if anything, you're better off exaggerating these little back and forth movements. I had one student who was, a second ago, was so unhappy with her drawing that she wanted to start over. And really the main little subtle error there that I think you were unhappy about was you just subtly straightened things out. Like instead of emphasizing the movement, you just like pulled it tight, and that's not pretty to look at. It's frustrating when you see all this beautiful movement and you're kind of like not capturing it. But your proportions were fine. We talk about negative space sometimes. You can see like there's a small, see this negative space between the legs is often useful to study. It's going to help you get the pose correct if you get stuck. I'd rather draw without ever looking at a negative space, because what I like about drawing is the ability to really construct the form, like as if from out of your deep understanding of the form, and if you're really able to do that, the negative spaces might be really different, because you might be showing us something about the way you're seeing the form. Negative space thinking is sort of like Dylan thinking. It's sort of like photographic thinking that I would rather avoid, but I still use it sometimes when I'm a complicated pose like this. It can be useful. And there's just a little bit of shading on this bottom of this forearm. I've seen a lot of, when I go to figure drawing, a lot of people people of a more delicate sensibility will often do what I did and just sort of not get into any detail with the male anatomy. That's up to you. It's never expected or required, so that's just like, if you go to a museum, we're trying to learn the body, and that means we're trying to learn the muscles and bones, okay? You never go to a museum and look at an artist's work and think, yeah, he really needed to do a little more careful study of the penis. It's not really a thing that, it's not represented often. Where it is represented, it's like this. It's like for a study, and that's not what Raphael was interested in. It's obviously not what he's focused on here. I did hear a theory once about why in the classical art the penises are also small. Did I ever share that with you? What I heard, and this could be, I heard from a guy I really respect, a guy I actually went to school with named Randy Mellick, and then he ran the drawing program at the Lyme Academy for many years. He claimed that it was that the ancient Greeks believed that the penis of a male figure should never be bigger than the nose, because then it would start to be read by the viewer as a third leg. So that's one theory. Just for aesthetic reasons, it should never be bigger than the nose. I don't know what his source of that information was, and I never really bothered to. Oh, well, that's a good theory.
It was like a status, that's why all the big figures have smaller.
That it was status, that a sign of a small penis was a sign of intelligence. That could be a theory. I think there was also a fair amount of, oh, forget it. I can't talk about this on my. Well, you know what the Greeks, they liked the younger men, so I don't know. That's what they say. It's a sign of youth for sure, which turns it into a whole different level of wrong. But from where we're sitting in modern times anyway. So, okay, I'm going to zoom out now to check my work. You can check yours. The last thing we're always going to do is sort of look for the pattern of lights and darks and try to get our line weight to balance the way we see it. So you see how he's got this really heavy line weight on the shadow side and a much more delicate line weight on the light side. And you see how when you do that, it really makes, even though it's still largely an outline drawing, just by easing up on the line weight on the light side compared to the shadow side, we're going to get like a much more of like a sense that the figure is flooded with light. And erase a couple more construction lines. Maybe just a couple more details in the hair. Don't forget that little shadow on the ground. And then, you know, it's going to take you a lot of practice to get this right with any consistency, but just take a few steps back from your work and just ask yourself, is my figure that I just drew, does he feel like he's holding his own weight? You know, does the pose feel similar to the pose that I was trying to draw? And then ask yourself, if it looks different, try to identify any little thing you might have got a little bit wrong, and just make a mental note to think about that next time. It's really like shooting baskets. You know, you're gonna improve dramatically through just mindless repetition. All you have to do is just keep trying, and after a while you're going to start sinking three-pointers all the time. But it's not like anyone starts out that way. And the wonderful thing about figure drawing that makes it unlike anything else is that just as you can interpret a face, you can recognize a person effortlessly because your brain's built to do that. You can recognize a gesture effortlessly. You can take a step back, look at this drawing, and you can say, yeah, my gesture looks a little stiff, or it looks like he's falling over, or you know, like your brain can tell you this stuff about your work. If you're drawing a tree, your brain doesn't provide you with any of that information. And that's why you're going to improve your ability to draw anything so much more rapidly if you challenge yourself, if you allow yourself to endure the challenges of figure drawing. So I'm going to say goodbye to my watchers at home, including some students who weren't here today, and we'll see you next time.